Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the McNair Center for Entrepreneurship and Economic Growth Free Enterprise Lunch and Learn for Monday, April 3rd, 2023. My name is George Webb, and I am the Scholar for Entrepreneurship here at the McNair Center. I'm also a Rice alumnus. I graduated from Rice with degrees in electrical engineering, bachelor's in 1988 and master's in 1991. I then earned a law degree, and I've worked as an intellectual property lawyer for most of my career. But I've had the good fortune to work here in the McNair Center for the last couple of years as one of my appointments here at Rice. The McNair Center is one of several research centers within the Baker Institute for Public Policy. As the name implies, the mission of the McNair Center is to conduct data-driven research in free enterprise and entrepreneurship policy, and also to promote sound policy and to promote informed public discourse on those topics. The motivation for the Free Enterprise Lunch and Learn is the recognition from one of our sponsors, the McNair Foundation, along with folks within the McNair Center itself, that the importance of free markets, and indeed the very concept of free markets, is something that may not be all that familiar to a lot of students and members of the Rice community. And so we want to have an opportunity to bring speakers to campus to share that perspective, which people here in the community may not otherwise be exposed to. We're very delighted here to have a foremost author, speaker, and scholar of free market economics, Dr. Richard Ebeling. He is the BB&T Distinguished Professor of Ethics and Free Enterprise Leadership at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. He is a very widely published author and speaker on the subject of free market economics, and some of the topics that he frequently writes and lectures about include monetary and fiscal policy, the impact of inflation and the business cycle on markets and society, banking reform, international trade and world peace, and the modern welfare state. He has also testified extensively before Congress, including the Subcommittee on Monetary Policy, testifying on monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, and the national debt problem, and sound money, monetary freedom, and the state. He has written more books than I can mention, but a couple that I do want to mention. He is the co-author of the 5-volume book In Defense of Capitalism, which was published by the Northwood University Press in 2010, from 2010 to 2014. Prior to his current appointment at the Citadel, Dr. Ebeling served as professor of economics at Northwood University in Michigan, as president for about 5 years for the Foundation for Economic Education based in New York, and then previously as a professor of economics at Hillsdale College, again in Michigan, and an assistant professor at the University of Dallas here in Texas. One of the things I think is really interesting, a particular perspective that he brings, is his own personal experience with non-market economies, and specifically in the latter years of the Soviet Union. In the early 1990s, Dr. Ebeling spent substantial time in the Soviet Union as a consultant to the Lithuanian and Soviet governments on privatization and the implementation of free market reforms. During that time, he saw a number of I think perhaps gut-wrenching events. He witnessed firsthand the Soviet military crackdown in Vilnius, Lithuania in January 1991, which was an early attempt to crush reforms there. And then in August 1991, he joined the defenders of Soviet liberalization in helping to defend the nation democratic movement against the failed Soviet hardline communist coup attempt. So he has seen socialist political economies in action to some extent at their worst, and he's also, of course, written widely, as I mentioned, on free market economics throughout the country and indeed throughout the world. We are very glad to have him here. The views that he is going to express are not those of the Baker Institute or of the McNair Center or of myself or my colleagues. They are entirely his own. Please give him your attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Ebeling.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I wasn't sure whether I was going to accept the offer, but they did say there'd be pizza along with the event. So I said, from Charleston, I'm on my way. But seriously, it is a pleasure to be here. I've been to Houston. Someone was asking me. I've been down to Houston here, I suppose, over the years 2 or 3 times. I think way back, I was attending some event here at Rice, but I hadn't really remembered it. And to my mind, you have a very beautiful campus here. It's very, very nice. I like the architectural styles, the trees. It's a very pleasant environment to be either a faculty member or a student. So thank you for having me here. Let me start off by saying that the title of my talk, Why Capitalism is the Most Ethical Economic System, very well may be viewed as highly problematical by some of you. Private enterprises and the businessmen who own and operate them are constantly accused of greed, dishonesty, destruction of the environment, exploitation of workers and minority groups, and general disregard for the wider betterment of the society as a whole. This is the impression found in movies and on television shows, during congressional hearings, and in media news reports or on the editorial pages of various media outlets. In addition, the wealthier the businessman, the more the presumption is that he must have come by his wealth by lying, cheating, and stealing. This view is often accompanied with the charge that we are living in absolutely terrible times. Never was there more inequality. Never was there more racism. Never was there so much privilege. Never was there so much poverty. Never was there so much disrespect and disregard for the poor and the marginalized. If someone like Charles Dickens was alive today and writing a modern version of his 1859 novel, A Tale of Two Cities, instead of beginning the book with the now famous line, "It was the best of times and it was the worst of times," this modern version would no doubt start with, "It was the worst of times and only getting worse." Let me say that at a time when people have become so concerned about fake news, never were the facts of human existence on this planet so untrue as this imagery of the human condition. Let me give some perspective on this, if I may. 200 years ago in 1820, the world population, according to demographers, economic historians, is estimated to have been about 1 billion people. And out of that 1 billion people on our planet in 1820, it's estimated that around 90% lived in poverty or even abject poverty, where abject poverty means the uncertainty of whether you'll have a meal the next day. Today, the world population is over 8 million. And out of that, less than 10% live in any type of poverty. And in a country like the United States, the kind of poverty through which humanity has suffered for most of its time on this planet is virtually non-existent. Life expectancy at birth rose from a worldwide average in 1820 of only 30 years. That's right. In 1820, the average person would be lucky if they lived until they were 30 years old. That has become a global average in 2020 to 67 years worldwide. And in the more industrialized countries, the average is closer to 75 years old before you finally pass away. 200 years ago, 43% of all newborns died before they were 5 years old. 43% of all newborns. Today, worldwide, that is less than 4%. In 1800, 90% of the world's population was illiterate. That is, people did not know how to read or write. Now and that was out of 1 billion people. By 2020, that had fallen to less than 15% of the world's population. And among the younger members of the population, the number of people who still suffer from illiteracy is way below 10%. Let me suggest that the political world is far different from what it was 200 years ago. In 1800, less than 5% of all the people around the world lived in any form of democratic system of government. Almost everywhere, people lived under autocratic governments, usually absolute or near absolute monarchies. And in other places, simply dictatorships, tyrants, or under colonial masters. Today, nearly 50% of the people around the world live under some form of democratic government. And under those democratic governments, most ordinary citizens have relatively wide protections for personal freedoms, such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of association. Now, it is true, unfortunately, too many people still live under one form of dictatorship or another. including the 1.4 million people who live in China. Nevertheless, while 200 years ago it was taken for granted that the most natural and normal form of government was a hereditary monarchy, even the worst dictatorships today have to use the rhetoric of sounding as if they're democratic, because that's presumed to be the ideal and the norm, which should be practiced everywhere, even when it's not. We should also not forget that in 1800, 1820, literal and legal slavery existed in most parts of the world. Certainly in the southern states of the US, but also throughout most of Central and South America under Spanish rule. All across Africa, in which Africans enslaved other Africans, and in almost all parts of Asia. This only changed with the emergence of an anti-slavery movement in Great Britain in the second half of the 1700s, which led to the abolition of slavery throughout the British Empire by an act of parliament in 1833, and in the United States as a result of, as we all know, our bloody Civil War of the 1860s. But under the pressure of the Anti-Slavery League and the abolitionist movement, especially as centered in the United States and Great Britain, by the end of the 19th century, slavery as a legal institution had come to a virtual end everywhere around the world. Now, it is true that actual old-fashioned slavery still exists in some parts of Africa today. In Mauritania, in West Africa, it's estimated that maybe as much as 25% of the population is made up of literal slaves who are de facto owned by others to do work or household chores. But no government can or does any longer give explicit endorsement to the idea that one human being should have any presumed right to own another human being. That's a radical change when throughout all of human history, slavery was the norm. That has only changed in the last 200 years. Now, all of these changes in the human condition did not occur by happenchance. They have all come about due to a radical change in ideas and social and economic policies that originated in the Western nations, particularly in Great Britain and France in the 1700s, and then, along with the United States, slowly began to spread in influence and practice to more and more parts of the world in the 19th and 20th centuries. The fundamental and core concept of this great revolution in the human condition was the idea of individual liberty, when such a notion had never existed before in any meaningful way. The idea that each and every human being has a right to their own life, their own liberty, and their own honestly acquired property. And that all human associations inside and outside of the marketplace should be based on voluntary consent and mutual agreement. Again, we have so much come to take this for granted that we've almost totally forgotten how much of all of human history before the last 200 or 300 years was almost universally based upon the opposite ideas of power, privilege, and plunder. This new set of ideas is what the 18th century classical economist Adam Smith, in his famous book, The Wealth of Nations, called a system of natural liberty. And it is not a coincidence that Adam Smith's famous book, The Wealth of Nations, appeared in print just a few months before the American founding fathers signed and declared and issued the Declaration of Independence in July of 1776, because both represented and reflected the same spirit of ideas, that all men are created equal and are endowed with certain unalienable rights, among which are each person's right to their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The ethical principles underlying this type of free society and free market system that Adam Smith spoke about is based upon three institutional prohibitions. Three institutional prohibitions. You may not kill, you may not steal, and you may not cheat or defraud others to get from them what you want. Now, if you can't kill and you can't steal and you can't cheat, this leaves only one ethical and economic way to obtain from others what they have and which they could provide to you. That being to offering them something in exchange that they will accept and want more than what they must give to you in transfer. Incentive-wise, this means that everyone in their own self-interest must focus their intentions on improving the conditions of others in society as the peaceful, nonviolent, and voluntary means of acquiring all they may want from their fellow human beings. This, too, is a radical change in both ideas, practices, and institutions. For all of human history, from all recorded history, before recorded history, how did you get what you wanted? You killed or enslaved, and you made the slave do work that either you couldn't do or you didn't want to do. The idea that the individual had a right to their own life? You have no such right. You're owned by the king or the prince or the tyrant or the lord of the manor. In the Middle Ages, if there was a lord of the manor who owned several of these estates and sold one of them to another aristocrat, the buying aristocrat didn't only get the land, didn't only get the livestock, didn't only get the physical tools and equipment on it, he acquired also the serfs on the land who were obligated to work for him. They had no right to leave the land. They were his property. And that is why in the Middle Ages it was said that city air or village air breathes free. Why? Because if you were a serf and you ran away from the land of the lord of the manor, and you could hide in a village or a town and a city for 1 year and a day, you were a free man. If you were caught, you were punished and returned to work for the rest of your days as the serf on that lord's manor. The idea that you're free as an unalienable right as a human being, this was new in all of human history. That you have a right to your liberty, you can't be commanded, controlled, whipped, beaten, threatened with death if you don't obey another's orders, to be treated as if you're a tool that he just picks up and uses and sets down with no will or purpose of your own. This was new in human history. And the idea that if you want to associate with others, it requires their consent and their agreement in an act of association and trade. Or as Adam Smith says in The Wealth of Nations, if you give this to me, I will give that to you, which is the essence of every trade. Let me suggest, does that not represent a respect and a dignity for the other? I can't force you to give me to it. I can't make you work for me to get it. I have to treat you with dignity and respect and negotiate with you, reason with you, persuade you that it's in your interest, not mine, to do something for me in exchange for what I will do for you. Economist Walter Williams, who passed away a few years ago, used to ask, why do you think the cattle ranchers in a place like Texas care for their herds of cattle, having to go out in all types of weather to keep them safe and well-fed, and incurring huge personal and financial expenses in the process? Is it out of their love for or benevolent feelings towards those consumers of meat in New York or California? Hardly. No, it is because in our complex system of division of labor, these Texas cattlemen specialize in the raising of cattle to feed the people of New York or California as the means of earning the living that enables them to then buy from others what they in turn want for themselves, their families, or others they care about with whom they share their good fortune. We take for granted that every time we go shopping for food, the supermarkets and the other stores will have the meats, fruits, vegetables, canned goods, and that all these items will be there waiting for us to buy. Every one of them has been produced, grown, processed, transported to the supermarket through the interdependent interconnections of multitudes of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people who know little or nothing about all the others involved, including the people who are going to buy their product. But they are simply guided by the motive and the self-interested incentive of finding a niche and a place for themselves in the system of division of labor through which they will earn the living to pursue their own goals, purposes, and meanings for life by serving others in these anonymous associations and transactions of the marketplace. And by the way, those transactions in the marketplace save us from the glaring and opinionated eyes of others. You know, we have these images of the small town, you know, the old-fashioned small town, where your neighbors are constantly looking in your window and seeing what you're doing and making value judgments about how you live and what you do. The beauty of a complex modern exchange society is that you have a way to live anonymously if you want to. What your values are, what you like, how you like to live, what you like to buy, what you like to read, whether you go to church or not. And if you go to church, which one? When you go into the supermarket and pick up off the shelf a bottle of breakfast cereal, do you wonder about the religion or the values or the behaviors or the interactions or the purposes of the people who make that breakfast cereal? No. They are just others who, through these chains of production in these anonymous relationships, just proceed to make a product that make you happy to have something to eat at the breakfast table. And they know nothing about you. They don't care about how you earned your money. Are you a lawyer, a doctor? Did you pick up the garbage? Are you a professor? Do you work in an office doing some typing work? Or you are an artist? Are you a musician? They don't care. They're just concerned about making a product that you want, breakfast cereal, as the means of earning their living. So each of us is free without the glaring eye of nosy neighbors of what we want our income for. Oh, look, he bought that kind of music. Oh, look, he watches those kind of TV shows. Oh, look how he dresses. Who put that kind of furniture in their house? The market gives us the anonymity to be ourselves without people judging us about whether we deserve that income because of the way we want to spend it. We don't often think about that, but that is profoundly important. In many places, people have not had that opportunity, and even in modern times. Mr. Webb was kind enough to mention some of my background and the fact that I had been traveling and doing a variety of advising and consulting on market reform and privatization in the last years of the Soviet Union. I met my wife there. My wife is Russian. She spent a good part of her life in the former Soviet Union, living under a system of socialist planning, the opposite of free enterprise and free markets. Under socialism, the government determined what education you would receive, what work to which you would be assigned with any of its chances of promotion, where you would live in a government-owned and assigned apartment complex, what medical care you would receive, and the standard and quality of life you would be expected from your birth to your death. And all, by the way, under affirmative action. Oh, yes. Affirmative action actually was first introduced in the Soviet Union not long after the Russian Revolution. Everyone had an internal passport in the Soviet Union. Not just one to travel around the country. Your internal papers, comrade. Line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5. The first line's your name, place of birth, name of your mother and your father, and then line 5. Your ethnicity. Were you Russian? Were you Ukrainian? Were you Uzbeki? Were you Lithuanian? Were you a Georgian? Were you Tajik? Were you Uzbek? Were you Jewish? And that determined your life fate. Because of places at university, places in positions, accepted into the party with its perks and privileges, were all dependent upon where you fit in the hierarchy of the affirmative action structure. Were you the working class? Were you the intellectual class? Were you the descendant or the children of enemies of the people? And what ethnic group did you belong to? And that determined the quotas of acceptance into school and positions in jobs and chances for promotion and where you were assigned, because everything was owned by the government in the apartment that you would have access to. In what city? You were permanently dependent upon the government for all that would determine your fate. Contrast that with your life in a country like the United States, where you can choose where you might want to go to school, Rice University as opposed to someplace else, what major you would try to earn a degree in, what type of career you might want to pursue after graduating, where you may want to live in terms of geographical location or type of residence, apartment, a condo, a standalone house. Here you can basically say what you want, read what you want, watch what you want, listen to what you want. Why is that possible? Because unlike socialism, these are private enterprises that supply these things. It is private and competing publishers, media outlets, entertainment enterprises, interested in catering to what will give you enjoyment and pleasure as the means of doing what? Earning the profits out of which they maintain their company and pay the salaries of those who are working for them. You didn't have freedom of worship in the Soviet Union. The churches had been all nationalized after the Russian Revolution. Most of them were made into warehouse facilities or offices. There were only a handful of churches operating in the Soviet Union approved by the state. And that required state-approved priests for the Russian Orthodox Church. And one way to be a licensed, approved member of the clergy in the Soviet Union was that, of course, you agreed informally to spy. Like in the Catholic Church, people would come to confess, and you were expected to tell the secret police what your parishioners had told you in the confessional. Otherwise, you could end up yourself being arrested, sent to a prison camp, or killed. United States, you want to practice a religion? You hire a construction company after buying a piece of land from someone, build the building, purchase the furniture, the pews, hire a printing company to print the Bibles and the hymnals, get the donations from your fellow parishioners to pay the electricity, the pastor or minister's salary, and you're free to do these things. And do you think the person who owns the land, or the construction company building you the building, or the publishing house printing the Bibles or the hymnals for you, care about this? That's their means of earning a living. Virtually all of them don't give a damn why you want to buy that land or build that building or have those books or have that furniture in the building or why you want the electrical lights on. You pay for a service, you pursue your ends, pay them as a means to do so, and they're taking those payments as the means to their ends as individuals in their corner of the system of division of labor. All of these personal affairs of values, beliefs, attitudes are depoliticized by putting them inside the marketplace, where we all serve as each other's means of achieving ends, but our ends are our own and nobody else's business. In other political systems, what you want and what you do and why you want to do it are matters of state and dictate and determine whether you will or whether you'll be punished for it. Are there great disparities in wealth in the United States? Yeah, there are. But in an actual free market, what is the only way in which someone can acquire such wealth is methods that, I'll remind you, you can't kill, you can't steal, you can't defraud. So the only way you get what you want is by offering others something that they desire in exchange for what you want from them. Think of professional athletes or movie stars. They earn tens of millions of dollars. Where did all this money come from? Every one of the dollars they earn ultimately comes from we, the freely choosing fans and viewers who value more highly the entertainment of watching the game or viewing the film than the price we pay to do so. And your dollar and my dollar and the other person's dollar all cumulatively add up to the money that someone is found to be worth in the eyes of those who are enjoying and purchasing their services. We freely and happily transfer some of the dollars we've earned by serving others to them for the pleasure of watching them provide this entertainment. Every market-oriented, honest business smartphone we decide to purchase, the car we purchase or lease, the apartment or house we own or rent, have all been made available to us by those offering things we want and desire and decide is worth the price we pay for them. In a free competitive market, if we do not like the shoes or the car or the housing facility from one seller, we turn to another and search out something that they're offering as the means to earn their livelihood that is better than their rivals, less expensive than their rivals, better featured than their rivals. Steve Jobs, as the entrepreneurial innovator of much of what occurred in the Apple company, earned tens of millions of dollars, far beyond what I will ever earn as an economics professor. This simply means that we, all the consumers in society, have valued what Steve Jobs with his iPhone and his iPad offered to us far more than some of you value my services to listen to what I have to say or read the articles I write. So what? So my income and standard of living is noticeably less than someone like a Steve Jobs. So what? He earned what others thought his services are worth to them, just as I earn what others think my services are worth in their eyes. To my mind, that's fair and just. I don't envy him. I don't resent him or those like him. I force no one to pay me more than what they think my services are worth to them. And no one is willing to pay me more than that. If I went to the president of the Citadel and I said, you know what, my contract's up for renewal, I really think I'm worth $1 million. I know it's a shocking thought that would greatly disappoint my wife, but I doubt if I'd get the $1 million. He probably would say to me, we've enjoyed having you here. Sorry, you won't be here in the fall. I'm paid what I'm worth in the eyes of all of you and others in society. Do I occasionally get the opportunity to give a guest lecture? Yes, and I'll admit it. I'm being paid a bit for my services rendered here. I write articles, services rendered. I teach at the Citadel. I get a regular, professor's salary, services rendered. Are there economists who make a lot more than me, who hold either my views or other people's views, other views? Yes. So what? Some economists are more insightful, more articulate, more persuasive than me. And if people find their arguments more interesting and persuasive, they get more for their writing or their lecturing than I do. So what? What I do not do is I do not turn to the government and have the government act as my agent to have transferred to me through taxes or regulations other people's money that those people do not want to voluntarily give to me for my services. I rely upon and believe the only honest way is through the market. Years ago, when I was a student like you, I was already a nerd majoring in economics. I used to read all this stuff all the time, including the Wall Street Journal. And I came across this article in the Wall Street Journal by a businessman named William Law. He owned a tannery business in Wisconsin. And he said in the opinion piece that he belonged to a tannery association in which other members were lobbying Washington, right, the Congress, to pass a protectionist legislation that would impose a tax on imported tannery products so as to protect their domestic market from the foreign competition. He, William Law, said he was not joining his fellow tannery manufacturers in this petition. He believed it would be immoral and unjust to make customers pay more through a government act of a tax, to pay more for the textile products that he helped manufacture than they needed to pay if not for that government imposition, and to penalize other foreign competitors who are merely trying to satisfy those consumers better than he perhaps would. He would rather go out of business, he said in this Wall Street Journal opinion piece, than earn money and stay in business dishonestly by using government to guarantee him customers that the customers did not want to give of their own free will. I admit there's few and far between many businessmen that'll state that so directly, but let me suggest that is the essence and the heart of the truly free enterprise entrepreneur and businessman. True to those principles, you don't kill, you don't steal, you don't defraud. Now, is there wealth in America and in many other parts of the world that have been unjustly acquired? Yes. My talk is on why capitalism is the most ethical economic system. But I don't defend a lot of capitalists. The capitalists who turn to Washington to be protected from their foreign competition by a tariff. The American capitalists, businessmen, entrepreneurs who turn to the government for a subsidy to cover expenses that they can't defray by selling their product to you and me honestly and above board. Those who turn to the government for regulations to shield them from domestic competition of the people who just want to make something for you and offer it to you in a better quality or a cheaper price. In my opinion, those are profits that have been gained unjustly. In the lingo, the jargon of the economists, it's come to be called rent-seeking, the acquiring of profits through political avenues rather than through competitive free markets by satisfying consumer demands. A defense of capitalism means a defense of a free competitive enterprise system, not a system that is corrupted by government favors and privileges to benefit some at the expense of others by using the power of government regulation and taxing authority. But I will ask you, which is the more moral system? Which is the more just system? That system, the ancient world of lords of the manor, or people getting favors and privileges at the expense of others, or an economic system that is based on the principles of peaceful and voluntary association, that no one can be forced, coerced to give others or associate with others in ways they do not want, other than those relationships they consider best and most preferable for themselves. What is more ethical? A political system that guarantees and secures each of us our life, liberty, and honestly acquired property, or one that uses its power to benefit some at the expense of others? Privileges for some, burdens for others. I would say that that's what makes a truly free market, free enterprise system, not just the system that delivers the goods, improves the quality and standards of living of virtually everyone on the planet, as I began with, but one that truly is a moral system that says each and every one of you is a distinct human being who owns yourself, guides your own life, chooses your own values, purposes, and meanings, and in the context of which no one can make you do anything that is not of your free choice and will in an act of voluntary agreement and consent. In my opinion, that's what makes rightly understood capitalism the most ethical economic system mankind has ever known. Thank you very much.
We've got time for a few questions. I will say that in recognition of 1 o'clock classes, we don't have a ton of time, but let's take about 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll have a closing recognition. So do you want to just decide who to call on? One thing I would ask, if you have a question, if you're faculty or staff, just tell us what department you're from, and if you're a student or an alum, tell us what class you're and what your major is. I think that'll be
Okay, so it's now time for the banana peels, the rotten tomatoes. Go for it. Yeah.
I'm Kerala. I'm a junior in engineering. So my question to you is, in your defense of capitalism, I feel like you associated some democratic ideals over the rights of liberty and life, you associated those with capitalism. Is that intrinsic to capitalism? When we have like authoritarian capitalist regimes that kind of remove those impact ideas?
There are regimes that are, okay. You notice at the end I distinguish between two types of capitalism. One is called crony capitalism. That's, favors, privileges, special deals with politicians versus that free market capitalism. I distinguish that. A lot of people say that capitalism is different than democracy. On the other hand, I consider that capitalism is a more refined democracy as an economic system. Each of us votes with the dollars we spend. And it's a pluralistic democracy. In our political democracy, it's winner take all. If candidate X wins, candidate Y loses. If party A wins, party B loses, and that determines who has a majority in the Congress or the Parliament, and therefore who gets to set the policies, and then what is imposed on everybody. The advantage of the marketplace is that it's pluralistic. Do majorities get the car or the clothes or the TV they want? But the market satisfies an unbelievable amount of niche demands. Think of streaming television now. There's like little niches. I mean, you can be interested in needlepoint, and there's some show on a streaming service on needlepoint. You want to watch some show of, like those, what is it, like dog tournaments where, they show the little poodles and stuff. How many people like to watch that? There's a niche corner for that. Think of the different types of food in the supermarkets. Niche elements of the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the entertainments we enjoy, the ways we like to house or furnish our homes. It's a pluralistic democracy where minority choices and preferences get satisfied. As long as there are enough customers of a product or a service that what they're willing and able to pay can cover the cost of providing it, there's going to be some enterpriser out there who's going to say, that's where I can earn a dollar. And that pluralism of the marketplace is a far more refined and gradient form of democracy than our current winner-take-all democracy.
One or two more questions.
Hi, I'm Karina. I have a question studying political science. You talk a lot about this pure form of capitalism that's fear of corruption, fear of favors. Do you think that's actually achievable in today's society? And if so, how? And how will companies?
Well, I'm confident because there was a time in American history, always with the preface, we live in an imperfect world with imperfect people and therefore imperfect things. We live in a country in which there was a far greater degree of the kind of economic liberty that I'm referring to in the 19th century through a good part of the United States, not all of the United States, than anything we experience today. If you believe that people should be able to live where they want, that includes internationally. Between 1840 and 1914, it is estimated that 65 million people left Europe to find a new place to live. 35 million out of the 65 million came to the United States. And for virtually all of that time, you didn't need a passport or a visa. There were no custom border controls, no counting and housing and determining whether you're eligible. If you were poor, you put some money together, borrowed some money from friends and relatives, bought a ticket of steerage on a ship across the Atlantic, arrived at Ellis Island at the mouth of the Hudson River in New York City, and they asked two questions of you there. Okay? Do you have a communicable disease? If you did, they held you in quarantine until the point where others couldn't catch it from you. And they asked another question, which now involves terminology that's considered politically incorrect. Are you an imbecile? That is, do you have a mental handicap and would be a dependency on others? And by the way, that was when there was no welfare state. They were concerned about private charity. But if you did not have a communicable disease, and if you were viewed as mentally able to hold a job and support yourself, you boarded a ferry, landed on a dock in Lower Manhattan in New York City. Welcome, you're now an American. Make a new life for yourself. Wow! You could pursue any career, any profession. You could change professions. You could move about. You could stay in a port city where you first landed, or you can be one of those people moving out west and settling on some unclaimed land and building a farm for yourself, or founding a town. How do you think most towns got their names? Some guy who was the first guy building a general store there. That was a relatively free society. Now, is that what we have today? No. And the reason why not is because most of you don't want it. You want other people's money without their consent. What do I mean by other people's money? You want other people to pay your tuition. You want other people to pay you for your retirement. You want other people to pay for your health care. You want other people to provide your housing or subsidize your business or give you a tax break at other competitors' expense or give you that tariff wall to protect you from foreign competition or you want to be a farmer where the government pays you for not growing crops. That is a system that the French 19th century economist Frederick Bastiat called viewing the state as the great fiction where everyone tries to live at everyone else's expense. There was a time when to take a handout, either from private charity or the state, was considered an embarrassment. Nobody's embarrassed about it anymore. I have a right to my Social Security. I have a right to my health care. But the question is, what does a right mean? It means you expect others to pay it because the money and the goods and services it represents doesn't fall from the sky. So you're saying these people will be forced by taxes to give me things I want. And that's the tragedy. Americans no longer believe in the freedoms upon which the country was founded. And to be honest, we will not have a truly free society until enough Americans once again rediscover and want to live what it means to be a true free human being. That you don't kill, you don't steal, and you don't cheat. And that includes not using the government to do it.
In view of time and impending classes, I think that will be our last question. So thank you both students for some very good questions.